Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and I want to thank you so much for joining me this Sunday evening. This Sunday evening, the 15th of September 2024. Tonight, my discussion tonight. I want to thank those who are joining me on TikTok, those on Instagram, those on Facebook, and those on YouTube. Thank you for joining, and please kindly do share the show. Tonight, I'll be having the discussion about deepening democracy in Jamaica, and I'll be joined by Professor Rosalie Hamilton tonight. And we'll just have this is my sort of Sunday evenings where we have a very heart-to-heart discussion on very poignant topics, take away from all the fluff and everything like that. But one of the things that I want to share is that deepening democracy in Jamaica requires strengthening citizen participation, improving accountability, and ensuring more inclusive governance. Jamaica, they say, has a long history of democratic governance, but there's still room for growth in fostering greater civic engagement, encouraging participation. Town halls, consultation, and digital platforms can empower citizens, especially marginalized groups, to have a more direct say in decision-making process. Additionally, expanding civic education, fostering youth engagement can build a stronger democratic culture. Strengthening grassroots movements and community-based organization also helps citizens actively shape policies that impact their lives, creating a more vibrant participatory democracy. Tonight, we'll discuss deepening democracy in Jamaica, the course. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll just start the show and I'll just bring in Professor Rosalie Hamilton in a few seconds. Good evening. Good evening. How are you, Professor? How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm actually here in Montego Bay at the S Hotel. I want to say, when you come back to Jamaica, if you want to leave the Republic of Ocherios and come to the Republic of Montego Bay, you must stay at the S Hotel. A
Okay.
fabulous Jamaican authentic hotel. I'm telling
Okay.
you, have
Okay.
a fabulous time.
Okay. There's and that's in Montego Bay there, yeah?
Montego Bay,
Yeah.
yeah.
I tell you, it's very hard sometimes to leave Otrus. I must
I
say that.
know, that's why I said it that way.
you know. But listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And as we just have a quick show to talk about deepening democracy in Jamaica, the course, and of course we have talked for years now, a couple of years now about constitution reform in Jamaica, democracy, advocacy, and therefore what I've seen you have done now, you're packaged something in a course to widen the scope. So tell us about deepening democracy in Jamaica, the course, Professor.
Well, let me start by saying,
Yeah.
there's been observation from our own lived experience, but also studies that have tracked the support for democracy.
Mm.
You hear people talking about, boy, them can't, the system not there for them, and there are all these kinds of views about our society. And in fact, there's an interesting study that's been done that the survey is done every 2 years
Yes.
across the region. This is the LAPOP American Barometer report, and they study opinions for people across the Latin American Caribbean. And
Yes.
what it tracked was that all the way back in 2006,
Yes.
the data on democracy had Jamaicans, 80% of Jamaicans supporting whatever people conceive to be democracy. And that's
Yes.
important, right?
Mm.
Because we all have our different definitions and understanding of what that is. But 80%, 2006. In
Yeah.
2021, less than 50%, in fact, 47% of Jamaicans said that they supported our democracy.
Mm.
Now, that's a very troubling decline. And that decline, by the way, is not unique to Jamaica. It's evident across the Americas. It's evident even in the US.
Yes.
And so we took note of that. And we also took note of another important data from those polls. About 55%, more than 50% of Jamaicans think that a strong leader who
Mm-hmm.
bends the rules to get things done is good for Jamaica.
Mm.
So that's troubling because you're talking, I mean, just those two pieces of data, more than 50% say they want a strong arm man who's
Wow.
going, man, not woman, who's going to solve our problems, solve crime
Yes.
problems. And then we have less than 50% saying they believe in democracy. Now, one of the things we wanted to do in the course is to really interrogate this idea of democracy. What exactly is it? What does it mean to us here in Jamaica, given our particular journey? And so, what we think the poll is picking up is the expression of democracy, of what we call democracy in Jamaica. But when we interrogate the ideals of a democracy, the freedoms that we want,
Yes.
the governance that we want, then we perhaps can conclude that what we have practiced is not really the democracy that we want. It's a
Mm.
version of it. And we need to strengthen that democracy, deepen and strengthen that democracy. So it's the deepening of the understanding first, and
Yes.
then, finding ways to engage the society to strengthen that democracy. And one important way, as is
Yes.
implied in the subtitle, Improving Citizen Participation, is
Yes.
that if more citizens actively engage in pushing our society to embrace the forms of democracy that we want, we'll get better outcomes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we talk about good governance, what are the key elements of good governance, and what we ought to be fighting for and advocating for. All of this is being done in the context of constitutional reform discussion. So we highlight the constitutional reform issues, the implications for much of what we want in a democracy should be embedded in our constitution. And importantly, we link all of this to economic development. As an Institute of Law and Economics, we feel
Yes.
that the economic progress is at the heart of the issues surrounding our democracy.
It is very interesting that in the body of the themes there, you got the constitutional reform, and because that is something which is very high on the agenda in Jamaica as Jamaica is moving forward. The both parties and everyone is actually excited on this agenda of Jamaica moving forward. So I'm glad how you have it there. And one of the things that I noticed with the write up, I'm just jumping right there where and I just read it there and persons can see it. Over the past 2 decades, we have seen declining voter turnout and other evidence of declining support for Jamaica's approach to democracy. There's also troubling signs of rising support for dictatorial rule, as you just said. This is noteworthy in the context of a declining standard of living over the past few decades. These trends raise fundamental questions about the adequacy of Jamaica's inherited democratic institutions to meet the challenges of a modern Jamaican society and economy, and the urgent need to deepen the understanding of democracy in Jamaica. You want to speak to those that narrative there, Professor?
Absolutely. At the
Mm.
same time, we're seeing the troubling signs of decreasing support for democracy and increasing support for dictatorial rule.
Yes,
And let me say also, um, with respect to the polls, remember they're very aggregative. There's people's understanding of what this means is another thing. But we have had local polls that point
yes,
to the fact that Jamaicans do not want a prime minister who is very dictatorial
mm,
and has too much powers.
yes,
So we have to read and try to get into the weeds of what does all of that mean, because you see some posts pointing in that direction and others pointing in other directions. Importantly, this matter of what is happening to the standard of living of the Jamaican people. And this is a discussion that been having for some time. But when we look at the data on the GDP per capita, which is a typical kind of economic measure of the standard of living, albeit not perfect, because we
Yeah.
have big gaps
Yes.
in that. But nonetheless, it's a measure of the standard of living, and it has been declining. And in
Mm.
fact, right now, today, our standard of living is equivalent to where we were in the 70s and at some point in the 80s or 90s. So we have not progressed, certainly not well relative to our competitors in the Caribbean, I should say, our partners in the Caribbean rather than even competitors, although we all
Yes.
compete in a global space. Um, and it's also true for other countries. Nonetheless, we see that this declining trend is what fuels a lot of the discontent that's taken place in Jamaica, especially noticeable since the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
Many people are feeling the burden of, increased prices, inflation, and other kinds of expressions that their standard of living is not what
Yes.
they want. And of course, the outcome for us for a long time has been migration.
And do you see the improving citizen participation, the good governance, constitution reform somehow leads into economic development? It's like a process there at the same time.
Very, very important
Mm.
question, because, the idea that economic development and democracy goes hand in hand is an idea that's been around for a long time. But when you look at the empirical evidence, it's mixed. It's not
Yes.
obvious that when you look across the world, you see that, some countries that are very developed, when you look at, for example, China, very developed, and people question the levels of democracy. And other countries where it doesn't seem to pan out. And I think what we try to do in the course is to show, listen, there are some fundamental rights and freedoms that we want in a democracy, and we can
Mm.
identify those. They're values that we want, and that these freedoms foster innovation and creativity, and these happen to be key to economic development in a
Mm.
highly competitive world economy. And
Yes.
so there is a correlation. And so if we look from the specific outcomes that we want in a democracy and some of the specific features we want in development, we see that there is a link. And
Yes.
importantly, we want in a democracy good governance and accountability and participation and inclusive policy making. And it is these that, again, are central to the kinds of development we want if we want inclusive policy making that can get us better economic development. There is two, when you
Yeah.
focus the ideas and policies in the hands of a few, you get limited outcomes. But
Yes.
when you put mechanisms in place to get more voices, more ideas, more thoughts in our set of policies, especially policies like crime that we've been
Mm.
trying to solve for so long, when we have that more inclusive joint decision making processes, we're likely to get better outcomes. So in that sense, there is a relationship, and we take participants through that process.
It's very important what you're saying now, especially in deepening democracy, because it is not just something which is in Jamaica now. We're seeing, would I say worldwide, but there's a level of apathy, in a sense, towards voting and getting involved in the political process. And I like what you said in this bit here. It seeks to deeper the understanding of democratic ideals. So therefore, persons in Jamaica, for argument's sake, and you can always correct me here, is that you're wanting them not to just just accepting civil society as few persons, but that all of them and everyone should be a part of civil society to change the dynamics with government, and so to be a part of the process, not just every 5 years or every 4 years.
Absolutely. And in fact, if we think about democracy simply in terms of the well known phrase, a society in which is built for the people, by the
Yeah.
people, and of the
Yes.
people, then the people are central
Yes.
to a democratic society. And it's not just the people sitting passively, it's about active civic engagement
Mm.
where you participate in key decisions that impact
Yes.
your life. That
Yes.
is the
Yes.
key. And it is this joint decision making process where you can get more information, better outcomes that can improve standard of livings. That is important in the development process. And you
Mm.
need constitutional arrangements and a legal framework
Mm.
that can ensure that those kinds of rights to participate in such a
Mm.
process, access to the information that is needed for such a process, all of those kinds of values that come into this joint decision making process is
Yes.
absolutely necessary. And so we treat
Yeah.
access to policy making power as an economic asset.
Yes. I have some comments coming through, and I just want to sort of mention a couple of things here. Someone said that the PNP have conference today. How do their ideas point to strengthening democracy if elected? And go further. Next question: are we at a point of lip service democracy in Jamaica? The narrative and rhetoric is high, but the practice is regressive. Shades of 1984. Do we have transparency as a value high accountability? I just throw that out just
Yes.
to keep my
Yeah.
my viewers engaged. Yes, and to
Yes, and in fact, that's exactly the point about our
mm,
perception and experience of democracy. It's not
yes,
what we think it ought to be. Again,
mm,
we can look across the world. There are lots of countries that are talking about being democratic. I mean,
yes,
we look at what is happening in Israel, for example, and
yes,
people
yes,
question, is this democracy? If that
mm,
is the expression of democracy, many people don't want to be a part of it. And
yes,
so my view is to move away from this aggregative idea called democracy,
yes,
and let's drill down to the specifics of what we want in a democracy. And when we fight for those things, we get better outcome. We can call it whatever we want.
mm.
But if we
Because
want good
yeah,
governance, let's fight for good governance. If we want freedom, let's
mm,
fight for those. So it is those collective values that we
mm,
call democracy that is important. It's no one thing. For example, a lot of
yes,
people think having elections is about democracy. Well,
yes,
that's just one expression of
yes.
democracy. That's not enough.
I was just thinking about the America bit there, because they said it's it's all to do with the college. So you could have more people vote for either, but it is a college, and people say, this doesn't make sense. I'm confused. You know what I mean? But as you rightly say, the election process of getting in Starmer for the UK, that's just one aspect of it, isn't it? That's what people
And
need to understand. Yes.
absolutely. And importantly, that important aspect requires people participation. In our case in Jamaica, we're seeing the voter turnout declining.
Mm,
And Jamaicans are getting so upset and fed up of the political system that we have that they are withdrawing. And in fact, this is the time to step up and say, no, actively, we don't like what we have. We
mm,
have an opportunity now in the constitutional reform process to say, hey, we want a different constitution, a constitution that can empower
mm.
us, that provides actual doable mechanisms for us to have a say,
Yes.
a constitution that provides effective oversight over the policymakers,
Mm.
the decision makers, the cabinet, these people who are put in power to execute our will.
No, you're right about that. And ladies and gentlemen, I've got Professor Rosalie Hamilton from Jamaica here, and we're looking at the course deepening democracy in Jamaica. Prof, let's go into how this works now, and part of the overview of the program. If you can speak into it, because what you really want at the same time is as a matter of fact, is to encourage persons to be involved, but also as we're touching with the diaspora, so people from the diaspora can also encourage their families back home to get involved. So if you can
Yes,
break down
absolutely.
the course, the overview as well. Yeah.
Yes, and importantly, the reason we're doing this, it's a platform just to provide more information,
Yes.
information by people who live here, involved in the process. The Institute of Law and Economics is doing this in collaboration with the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP,
Jump.
as
Okay.
well as
Mm.
the National Integrity Action.
Yes.
And both leaders are, providing tutorials and lectures with respect to some of the modules. And so we feel that we want all of this information to be available to Jamaicans and anybody who wants
Mm.
to understand our democracy and what to do. And so we are targeting young lawyers. The Institute of Law and Economics train paralegals and lawyers. And so we target them and ensure that as part of their training in the Institute of Law and Economics, they have access to this information. We want advocates, community leaders, church leaders, anyone who really is concerned about what's happening. And the target group is important because we want these individuals with the depth of knowledge that will be provided in the course to
Yes.
feel emboldened and to understand their own responsibility to share the information and to encourage other Jamaicans to become more active.
Yeah, that's very good. Because as you rightly said, as we just said a while ago, that this is not just for the big person, but this is for everyone at the same time to be a part of the process, and for everyone to feel that they are part of civil society as well, isn't it? To be a part of the whole
Absolutely.
aspect
Right.
of civil society. And if we just go down further regarding the objectives, yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
again, we want to share information, deepen understanding, and really focus on the roles and responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. Focus on what we mean by good governance.
Mm,
Focus on the issues that are important in constitutional reform in order to get the outcomes we want. And a big part of the outcome we want is our economic outcomes.
yes,
And
yes.
as we shape this republic, Jamaicans are asking the question, okay, so we change the king as our head of state. We
Mm.
have a local head of state. How will it affect how I live every day?
Or the
Will I
price of
live
rice.
better off? Absolutely. Will it affect the
Yeah.
price of bread? And we
Mm,
say, yes, it can if we go beyond these
yes.
changes. It's not enough just to change the head of state. We have to do more. We have to look again at the role of the executive in the legislature. We've had
Mm,
an arrangement in which our executive dominates the legislative process, and there's no effective oversight of cabinet decisions. And so we have to find a way to provide much more oversight, much more opportunities for citizens and communities to have a
mm.
say on these matters.
Yes, yes. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, also what I've done, I've put the contact details there for you to get in touch and to be a part of the course, and also to reach out to Professor. Someone said they want to reach out to you. That's correct, isn't it? I can go hello at
Sure,
ILEAJ. Yeah,
absolutely. Just
yeah,
send me an email. Yes.
yeah. No problem. And looking at the breakdown of the course now, as I can see some dates there, the time frames of persons who are interested and seeing and
Yes.
yeah, the dates there we're looking at.
Yes, so we start on Monday tomorrow,
Oh,
and
tomorrow.
in
Okay.
person. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
No, no, it's in person, but it will also be available online. You'll get a link so you could tune
Mm,
in. We wanted to meet those who are interested face to face, have a good chat, but all the other modules as well as tutorials will be online. So if you're overseas, you can participate yourself if you're in the
Yes.
diaspora. And certainly, as you rightly said, Sylbourne, you want to encourage people in Jamaica to participate. We typically do it late at night, so I know that
Yes.
might be inconvenience for your timing, 6 to
Mm.
8. But once you register, we can get you the material,
Yes.
and you can go through the material. The tutorials, of course, are being organized at a time that's convenient for the participant and the tutor. And of course, as I said earlier, it is free, and it's free because we want every Jamaican who's interested to have an opportunity to get
Yeah.
more information and to be
Yeah.
part of a dialogue about our own understanding of these issues
Mm.
and what we think are important to deepening our democracy in Jamaica and
Yeah.
enabling us to get better outcomes.
It is very interesting what you said about getting it into the hands of persons because leading up to elections, leading up to constitution reform, having the town hall meetings with the CRC, a lot of people um, sort of have a sort of level of ignorance as to what is this about. So this is now an opportunity where, after all these different meetings and discussions that we have had, you guys have come put this compartmentalize it now in this course free of cost. Of course, you got sponsors and everything that makes this work, so people can actually be a part of it, be a part of the process, and as you rightly say, in person in New Kingston and online Zoom. And if people, in a sense, prof, may not be able to go to the courses or the classes, can they also be a part of it by getting just the materials?
Yes. Again, the registration is important, and we can send some of the material. It will be online, but those arrangements are set up once you
Mm,
register. We can inform you.
yes. And looking at the course outline, and just to help people, and I believe Bella Calf, who was asking those questions, as you can see, the introduction to democracy and development, September 6th, introduction concept of democracy and development, Jamaica historical pursuit. If you can just speak into A, B, and C quickly, Professor, we'll just run through
Yeah.
the.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, some of the introductory concepts is what I mentioned earlier about
Yes.
this kind of tension and relationship between democracy and development. Is
Mm,
one necessary for the other? And we show how it is possible, and we look for that link between deepening democracy, deepening more participatory decision making, and how important that is for economic development. In fact, there is empirical work for economists and others who are interested. There are deeper empirical economic insights, modeling that can show that interface, show that when we get these kinds of joint decision making that can facilitate certain segments of our society, then we can show econometrically that we can get better outcomes. So that's a much more technical perspective, but which
yes.
we won't go into the course.
Yes.
But that is the foundations of the argument. So we're not just pulling it out of thin air.
Yes.
The historical perspective is important. Because how did we get here? So there's a whole journey to betterment that Jeanette Calder does, and she does an excellent job in just providing a historical perspective of
Mm,
our own pursuit for democracy and development. And that's important because that journey looks very different. In fact, when you look at the American journey, as they have hinted at it,
mm,
I shouldn't even say hinted, but stated explicitly in
yes.
their preamble to their constitution, when they say, we the people, in order to
Yes.
perfect their union, right?
Mm,
That was the struggle. They were trying to perfect a union. They had
mm,
these separate states and so on and so on. And that was it. Now, that has particular meaning to them. And so
mm,
their expression of democracy is linked very much to their own historical experience. We ask the question, we, the people in Jamaica,
mm,
are creating this constitution in order to do what?
yes.
What is our
Yes.
what is our pursuit? And we've argued that when we
Mm,
look at our history, we are in pursuit of freedom, self-determination, and a
mm,
whole a framework for regaining our humanity as a people. We
mm,
lost that during the institution of slavery. And the viciousness of our expression of crime are remnants of that reality. And so
yeah.
we need to create a framework in which we can coexist in a much more peaceful way and in a way that can enable us to achieve real freedom and real expression of self determination. And so we
What?
look at that post
Yeah.
independence experience to ask
Mm.
ourselves, what is that journey for democracy and development?
What I'm getting at, Prof, in a way, I'm getting at something whereby it's like you're gonna be digging deep down in and pull out, and sometimes it's gonna be painful, isn't it?
Very painful.
It reminds me of something that a few people and I have been talking about, like the journey that Jamaica has been through from slavery to now and from 1962 and upwards with the whole political debacle in Jamaica. Is like there's this need for this. I know we're going off into this truth and reconciliation
Yeah.
thing, and this is what this is saying to me, like
Well, let me
historical.
say,
Yeah, go
let me
on, go
say
on.
we're not going to stay in the history, right? And the historical context is only going to be module one.
Yeah,
We'll do some more history, for example, looking at our local government system, where it's coming from. But that's about context.
yes,
And yes,
yes.
that past is painful, but
Mm,
we've grown up. We're 62 years old as a
yes,
nation,
yes,
and so we are moving on. We're
yes,
moving on, and we're talking now about what it will take for us to really organize a better society,
yes. So I'm
right?
seeing
And
that.
so
Yeah. Mm,
the second tutorial speaks to
yes.
how government works. Now, we
Yes.
thought that necessary because there's a lot of misconceptions about how government works, and we thought that we would clarify that some people, especially people who work in government, have a deeper understanding, and others who would have done, studied political science and so on, have a deeper understanding. But we
Mm,
find that the average Jamaican don't understand, for example, that our government comprises three arms. Our government
yes.
is not the ruling Labour Party.
Yes.
Our
Yes.
government really are the members of parliament, right? The legislators, our
Mm,
judiciary, and it also includes the executive. And the
yes.
executive includes the civil service. So the civil service, the public service, is part of the government. So, those kinds of things, and we get into details on that. In the second module, we begin to go deeper now into the types of democracy, and
Yes.
what democracy means in different countries, in different places, and in different phases. In fact, for a long time, the idea of more direct democracy was
Yes.
the expression in Greece, and we see that we've evolved to much more representative democracy. But more recently, people are coming back to this fusion of both representative democracy and direct democracy as a better expression of democracy, because we've been so dissatisfied with our representatives,
Mm,
and so those kinds of discussions we talk about the responsibility of government, central, local, and community governance is something that we talk a lot about, because we see that as important rights and responsibilities of
yeah.
citizens in a democracy, and the
The,
groups, the
mm,
NGOs, and so on.
just to interject, the point that you mentioned about government and the whole aspect of government and governance, as someone just said here, he said, I keep telling people that the PNP and JLP are the government, and to hold the opposition is in as much accountability. I
Yeah.
think that's the point. What you're saying is as well.
Yes.
It's not just
Yes.
seeing the JLP as the government, but they're all a part of the process, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in our third module now, we really delve much more into governance, that distinction between government and governance, and what is good government.
Mm,
Good governance, right?
yes.
And we get into the structure of the constitution, the role and meaning of constitutions, the strengths and weaknesses of our current constitutional arrangement. And that then gets us into the last module, where we talk about now the kinds of constitutional changes that have
Yes.
led to the different republics. And the republics now in the Caribbean include Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago,
Yes.
Dominica, and of course Barbados. And
Mm.
we kind of scan and look at those republics and see if there are lessons we can learn. And importantly, we wrap up the course with some of the key reforms that we see as vital to the kinds of constitutional reform that can not just enhance our democracy, but importantly, will also give us better economic outcomes.
And do you then send persons out and say, now you have learned, go out?
Absolutely not. We say, listen, we're now part of a team.
Yes, yes,
You need to go and talk to Jamaicans, help
yes,
them to understand these issues you've learned, and join us as we, as an Institute of Law and Economics, go out to
yes.
communities and engage communities. One of the things we're currently doing is asking communities, what do you want in a constitution? In fact, we've started the process. I had two meetings. In fact, it's one of the reasons I'm here in Montego Bay. And we
Yes,
had two meetings, one in Montego, one in St. James, one in Trelawney. And, we start the conversation by asking members of the community leaders, what kind of community development do you want?
yes,
We start from the economic perspective, right? All of the answers are linked to the economic and infrastructural and environmental, etc.,
mm,
development of their communities.
yes,
And
yes,
so we start there and ask the question, are these outcomes that you want? You want to improve living standards. Everybody talk about that. They want growth for their community so everybody could live better and so on. All of that. Well, how can the Constitution help you to achieve that?
mm.
And those are the questions are probing to be able to say, this is what the community wants. And therefore, perhaps we have to consider these kinds of reforms in the Constitution that can help them to achieve those outcomes.
And are you looking for persons who to support, like to volunteer and to come on board with the work that you're doing here?
Absolutely. You said we're getting sponsors. Yes, we have some sponsorship.
Yes.
I definitely want to pick up Chris Issa as
Okay.
part of the Spanish Court and S Hotel. He's
Mm.
the owner. He's supported the work we're doing and provided a framework in which we could overnight as we go
Mm.
out to the different communities in this part of the world. And
Yes.
so, as I said, you certainly can come on down and join us in
Yes.
the
Well,
Republic of
because
Montego.
there's a gentleman on Instagram, Bella Claff, and he said he liked to work and be a part of the institute. So I'm encouraging him to email you,
Okay,
from the
please
show.
do, please do.
So
And let me just say to the
yeah.
listeners that we're willing to come to any community. You let us know. We need the support. So if you can organize the meetings, we will guide you in terms of the kinds of. It's a kind of focus group discussion, so
Mm.
it's not a community meeting where we're inviting everyone. We want to
Yes.
talk to community leaders, and we want to hear from the leaders about how
Yes.
they see growth and development in their community. So we take a different view. We're not
Mm.
just talking constitution, we're talking
Yes.
law and economics.
Yeah. I tell you, I find it very interesting because when I went to Jamaica of recent days, of course, I went to my old primary school in Old Truist. I went to York Castle High School, which my former high school. I went to Brownson Community College. And one of the things I thought about, just like with this now, is that with the persons who are trained up in it and with yourself,
Mm.
even start some sort of break off courses down those sites, spread it around the country, of course, which is of course is a plan because you're not just open for it to just remain in Kingston and on Zoom, but
Absolutely.
for something to be bigger. So I think that is great. But in light of where we are now, and if we touch onto something which is pressing now before we go, let's do let's a classic case now. A classic case now. Should there be a set date or set time frame for a by-election when a constituency or a council division is without an elected representative? Is this what people will feed into, or What's your thoughts about that? Because that's where the constitution reform gives some level of certainty, whereby it is not just left to the prime minister at his whims and fancy, but people are having some level of certainty, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's again speaks to the power of the prime minister
Yes.
and the questions that Jamaicans now are asking is whether these powers to set an election date at the political convenience of a
Yes.
leader. And we've seen
Yes.
it, of course, since 1962, that all
Yes.
political leaders have used that opportunity given to
Mm,
them under the Constitution to set that date and set it at a time that's politically expedient. And we
mm,
think, many of us who are following the Constitution are concerned about our democracy, suggests that it doesn't go down well in the democracy because the
mm,
whole idea of an election is about people representation. And therefore, there's a problem in where you have a constituency that has no representation for about a
yeah.
year. That's the
Yes.
case of the
Yes.
former speaker, right?
Yes.
And you had a resignation of someone from a constituency, and the very next day
Mm,
there is a date for the replacement. Now, Jamaicans have to ask, well, and certainly those who have been without a representation for a year have to ask, what's happening here? Why am I treated differently?
or should I say, me
Um,
and somebody too?
exactly. I mean, this is them, we're on a level, right? But the
Yes.
reality
Yes.
is that that is not consistent with a democracy, and
Mm,
so we want predictable time frames for these elections, not just these by-elections, national
mm,
elections as well. And
yes.
so there's been a loud voice about this. In fact, if you recall many years ago, a JLP administration had been advocating for
Yes.
fixed election dates, right? And so this idea has been around for some time that we ought to fix the election dates so it's
Mm,
predictable. And many people, business people in the society are asking for that so that they
yeah.
can plan. I mean, especially in a world today where many of us are working overseas, online, and so on and so we're
Yeah.
traveling. We don't want to, and you have to plan in advance for your travels and your meetings and so
Yes.
on. You want to be able to vote. It's not as if you can vote overseas. You have to be back in your country. So you want to be able to plan. So I think that it is a rich part of this conversation
Mm.
about the extent to which we continue to keep this kind of power in the hands of one person.
And
And it is this
yeah.
kind of decentralization of power that is now being discussed in the constitutional reform process.
And you know what? You know what? Another question also, and because it's a felt topic which is out there now. So even with the by-election which is taking place, and many people are saying now, okay, just one of the mainstream party has put themselves forward. Of course, I understand two independent and minor parties put themselves forward as well, which I interviewed. But are people disenfranchised by the fact that, like, the PNP did not put themselves forward? There's that imbalanced whole democratic process again.
Well, I think it would clearly be a disappointment
Mm,
for members of the People's National Party from that constituency who wanted
yes.
a choice. They clearly would be disappointed. And so I think that's an internal issue with those members of the party and the party.
Mm,
And
mm,
the question, that they should ask the party is, if they were not consulted, for example, why were we not consulted in that
yes.
decision? If they were consulted and they agreed with the party, then that's a party decision.
Mm,
Okay. And so I think that to the extent that those people who are part of that political process have an issue, that's an internal issue. But for the rest of Jamaica,
yes.
sorry, the rest of the people in the constituency,
Yes.
several questions are asked. One, um, would you vote anyway? Whether you had the two major parties. Because
Mm,
remember, the data is telling us nearly 70% of Jamaicans are just not voting. right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's one thing. And the second thing is that, okay, the data we have suggests that the reason people are not voting is that they don't see a difference between the two political parties and they think
Mm,
these two parties can't be trusted, and so they're turned off. Well, are you going to stay turned off forever? Is
yes.
it not? Is it no? When you're not voting a party into power,
Mm,
you're simply voting a candidate. Perhaps you could consider just demonstrating your interest in being part of the process by
yes.
voting one of the candidates that are now on the table. You have three candidates.
And
Go out and vote. Make a decision. Make your voice heard.
and because we always talk about we're going to go quickly. I know we always talk about like the 37% who turned out in the last general election of 1.9 million people, which was over 700,000 people. 29% of the electoral register again turned out at the last local government elections. Okay, say that's there. And we always talk about voting is one aspect of things. Just because they didn't turn out to vote, there are other ways that the people can still be a part of the political process to hold the government accountable, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's
Yes,
so important because in a
yes,
sense, it's a simple, easy decision to simply turn up and go out and vote,
yes,
right?
yes,
But the
yes,
more important decision from my perspective is how you hold the people who represent you, whether you voted for them or not,
no,
they are your representatives in a
yes,
democratic process that we have.
yes,
Then how do you hold them accountable? How do
mm,
you ensure that they are acting on your behalf? And
yes,
that's not a passive act. It must mean that you have to engage in meetings and dialogue, organize your communities or get involved in community organizations that exist.
be
And
deliberate and intentional, isn't it?
absolutely. And it
Mm,
is when we fall asleep that mischief happens.
yes,
And I say to Jamaicans for 62 years, we have been wanting our political leaders to change, but we
mm,
are not prepared to change. We are
yes,
prepared to continue this downward trend in terms of active participation. And I think
mm,
it's when we start to turn it up in all its forms, not just voting, as you correctly say. It is when we start to actively engage and demand the kind of representation we want that the
mm.
politics of Jamaica will change and the outcomes of Jamaica will
Yeah.
change.
Professor Rosalie Hamilton, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And we could go on forever as normal. We said we're going to keep it 45 minutes. And you're down there in Montego Bay. While it's getting a bit chilly over here in the UK now. Any last word that of course, I'm sharing the email address for persons to engage with it. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Well, I would just say to, all of you in the diaspora who are keenly observing all of this is that, as Jamaicans, you have a stake in the future of our country. And so I commend you, Sylbourne, and
Mm,
for the work you do to continue to engage all of us here and
yes.
to keep Jamaicans in the diaspora and others who are concerned about what's happening in our country informed. So I
Yeah.
congratulate you and I commend you on
Thanks.
the work you're doing. Encourage others to stay tuned, continue
Yes.
to listen to these kinds of programming that
Yes.
provides the kind of information that I think can improve our country. This is a
Mm,
very important debate about our
yes.
democracy. It's not just about the Constitution. The Constitution is at the core, but it
Yes.
goes beyond that. It goes to who we are, what we're trying to fight for, and
Yeah.
it is in that context we feel the work that we're doing, trying to link these economic issues with the legal framework to
Mm.
facilitate economic development, is critical. And
and
so
also and also the timing is very crucial now as well.
yes, well, the timing is not our choice, other than the
Yes,
fact that we came to the end of, or a phase anyway, in the
yes,
constitutional reform process. Many of us were dissatisfied that there was not enough information out there. We feel that we should join the process. The government is doing their part. They're
Yes.
now sharing the report to others and so on. And so we feel as civil society members, we need to do our part as well and to engage this dialogue with Jamaicans to ensure that we have a better understanding of what we're all trying to do and what is required to push our country forward.
And for the record, someone here in Instagram say, I'm in Montego Bay now. Although he's a Ochi man, big up Sylbourne. Professor, have a good evening, and thank you so much. I'm sort of looking over because I'm seeing following up also in Jamaica with the speech by Mark Golden. So I'm gonna tune into his speech and what he's saying.
I
As
certainly
well.
will too. We all will.
We
All
always
right.
will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night, Professor.
Enough respect, one love.
Peace
Good.
out. Bye bye. Thank you. Cheers. Cheers. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining tonight, and you can of course tune in to the main show on YouTube. You can go on YouTube where you can actually watch the show properly. Those on Instagram, you're not going to be able to see. You're going to see my face only. You shouldn't just see my face. You should see the lovely Professor Rosalie Hamilton and the PowerPoint that we were showing, where you can actually watch. And remember to share, like, and don't dislike the whole thing. One of the things, though, that I wanted to say was that deepening democracy involves, as we're talking about, addressing systemic challenges like corruption, equitable distribution of resources, building stronger institutional frameworks, like what Professor was talking about, for accountability is crucial to maintaining public trust in democratic processes. Bella Claff on Instagram was talking about transparency in government spending, reforms in campaign finances, and as you mentioned, also about scrutinizing even the speech from the government at present, talking about things like if an MP is from another area, should he run in a particular area? And they're sort of fixing that. So the whole thing about the whole democratic process is very important, and deepening it is so crucial. So I want to thank you so much, everyone, for coming on. Sunday nights, which I try to do at different times, having some very interesting discussion. I have on my horizon to have uh, uh, Ronnie Twaits, Reverend Ronnie Twaits, to come on the show at some point. I'm looking for some sort of senior elders in the Jamaica system to give their perspective, because I believe that we all want to see a better Jamaica as well. I strongly believe that even if you're overseas or so, but you must keep a keen eye keep focus on Jamaica as much as possible, because that is important. And nowhere no better than yard, because if anything happens, we need to make sure that we have our bridges intact. Bella Claff and everyone, thank you so much for joining. Peace out. Two women in highly respected academic, Professor Hamilton and Professor Scribble. Yeah, and Bella, she said to reach out to her. Just so you watch a show, just reach out to her. If anything, link me as well. I can give her other number as well. Let's be a part of the whole process. So thank you very much, and have a good night. God bless you, and have a good week.